What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Mortal Shell 2, which launched into its initial 72-hour early access period yesterday from the time of this video. And while reviews did go up yesterday, this is a first impressions video obviously, and that is because I did not get a review key for this. I did in fact pay for it, and I just grabbed the version with those extra few days so I could go ahead and get a jump on this with everything else we've got going on in just a week or two. But with that in mind, I did actually play the open beta a while back, which is important because while the progress from that beta didn't carry over, you do get some extra little things from it, like the ability to skip the prologue in the main game as an example, though I did go ahead and run through it so I could grab the achievements from the prologue. But as a first impressions go, I should probably start with the fact that they at least took some actual feedback from that open beta. For instance, in that video I talked about there being this illusionist boss who had a really easy sort of blind spot you could exploit, and all of his attacks would go straight over your head. They seem to have fixed that, but even beyond that stuff, they also implemented a few other interesting things like the sort of in-game difficulty options. So another thing to mention right here at the beginning is that Mortal Shell 2, being a Souls-like, ultimately comes with a sort of baseline level of difficulty. However, you do have some options to both decrease and increase that difficulty. Now, on the decrease side of things, you've got this item called the Slayer Seal. By equipping that item, you basically make yourself much stronger, but that does come at the downside of turning off achievements if that matters to you, like it does to me. However, Slayer Seal aside, there's also a handful of the typical in-game methods of play that can give you an easier time. There are items that will summon in things to distract enemies. There are various seals which can change the way and nature of how you block or parry, that kind of thing, which can make things easier. Either way, though, always interesting to see how these types of games handle difficulty and the challenge in them. But in the case of Mortal Shell 2, I do believe this game is on the slightly smaller side. Given that the reviews are out and everything already, I've heard that the rough 100% for people is 40 to 60 hours. However, that 100% is going to require a New Game Plus run, and then I believe half of another New Game Plus run to get some items. And it's when you hit New Game Plus, you may well consider upping the difficulty, and apparently that is possible through the game's night system. So it's possible to unlock an NPC at your main hub of Marrow Keep, where that NPC will then turn at nighttime, which increases the difficulty instead of decreasing it. So you've got some options in both directions, and from what I understand, that night difficulty setup actually unlocks some stuff out in the world as well. Curious to see how that winds up playing out in the full review at the end of the day. But with that sort of initial stuff out of the way, let's get back to basics a little bit. If you don't know much about the game at all, Mortal Shell 2 puts us in the role of the Harbinger of the Undermether. The Undermether, a sort of deity-like being that fell from the sky only to be turned into various temples and the like. Only this being was corrupted over time, and that corruption has spread forth into the world, causing effectively a small apocalypse that not only caused the current problems, but also scattered and corrupted the Undermether's eggs. And as the Harbinger of the Undermether, your job is basically to gather up those eggs and then use them to clear out the corruption that has become so rampant. That's the sort of basic plot setup. However, as a Harbinger, we have naturally a few special powers. One, our sort of bizarre husk of a body is not the only thing we can make use of, because we can possess certain individuals known as shells, taking their powers for our own, and it's a combination of those shells, the weapons you're equipping, alongside a handful of other things that make up the progression systems you'll be engaging with. Now, what I really like about the progression of this game is that all of this is all separate from one another, so to speak. So, for instance, each of your shells can be upgraded. You can do this by bringing glimpses to this very large woman in Marrow Keep, and she can both point you in the direction of the other shells you have yet to collect, but also increase your bond with them, which allows you to relive their memories and then upgrade them as well via upgrading their spells alongside the basics. And then that's on top of each shell having its own individual powers and abilities, making each one of them feel pretty unique. But then that is still separate from your weapons and the like. So you can't equip any weapon to any shell, you just have to also find the weapons in order to do that. And then of course certain weapons will play a little differently with individual shells. And then if that wasn't enough, there's also equipment that you can find called tar stones, which can then be activated to produce other effects that will then interact with the effects from the shells. And so there's a lot of fun interplay there that I think works specifically because they broke a lot of that up into individual bits, rather than just having things like your character's base level matter the most. Now, as a Souls-like, it still kind of fundamentally works the same way there. However, when we kill things and earn our experience, known as gloom, that is also separate from actual gold you can pick up and spend at vendors. But when you stop by a beacon to actually use it, when you level up your base character, most of what you're doing is increasing like health and like, with a combination of your character's level and how much progress you've made on the shell you're actually using being the then sum total of the usefulness of the character you are currently playing. Now, another interesting thing about Mortal Shell 2 is its sort of compact open world. Once you get out of the tutorial area, you will be shipped off to Marrow Keep, which is going to act as your base of operations, and it's sort of set centrally in the middle of the map we have access to. This map is fairly compact. You'll be able to travel from Marrow Keep to various places, and it won't be very long until you've unlocked fast travel by collecting enough of the eggs you are supposed to be after, which is also what advances the world. But the cool thing here, especially with how all of that is presented, is that collecting those eggs and everything is the thing that primarily moves the story forward, and so you have a lot of discretion in terms of where you go when. Some stuff will be blocked off initially until you get enough of those eggs, but that really doesn't take very long, after which you're largely free to explore as you please, and things can kind of be taken at your own pace, which I think helps when the world itself is, again, not terribly large, but you have a lot of discretion in how you choose to go about exploring it. Now, there are things like dungeons and whatnot. They are usually separated from the world by what is, in effect, a sort of loading screen, but it's more like a portal. And so there are things to actually explore out there in the world, and that's on top of the, I guess you could call them more like legacy dungeon type experiences, where the big bosses are naturally. Now, the reward for doing all that exploration and going through those dungeons is, outside of the gloom and the experience, you get other upgrade materials, things that'll let you upgrade the forge, that then allows you to upgrade your weapons, your melee weapon, your ranged weapon options, that sort of stuff. But in order to upgrade those things, you do have to find them. That's where the maps can come in. The vendor at Marrow Keep can sell you a bunch of maps to point you to the right locations that you need to be searching for your weapons, and I believe even potentially some of the optional bosses as well. Now, another interesting change from the open beta is that we actually have access to more and more NPCs that were not there originally, giving us a peek into some of the, let's say, quests that you can get up to, the sort of side activities. Now, from what I understand, none of those are missable in comparison to other Souls-likes, but I'll have to see how that pans out for myself. And while all of that is well and good, sure, a big part of any Souls-like is naturally the combat, and obviously that's the big focus here as well, and we're going to get up to a good bit of it. Now, one interesting sort of combat-related thing is that the beacons, your checkpoints in this one, do actually have to be cleansed. Usually the reward is some of the eggs where you're supposed to be looking for, but also a challenge in the checkpoints themselves. Sometimes you get rewards just for trying these things. In order to actually cleanse the area around the beacons that you find, you have to go into them and take care of the enemies that have corrupted it. And the good news there is that this doesn't stop you from using the beacon as a place to heal and reset enemies, that kind of thing. So if you're struggling with a particular one, it is relatively easy to keep trying because you can just spawn right there at the beacon you just died at. But otherwise, I would say combat is interesting. Like a great many Souls-likes, it has a lot of the hallmarks of the genre with a little bit, I would say, more unusual stuff like the ability to shoot your guns and whatnot. As you hit enemies in combat, you will build resolve, and this is going to allow you to do things like activate your tar stones, activate your shell abilities, like whatever that shell is good for usually works off of resolve. And it also lets you shoot your ranged weaponry. Now, this is basically what you could imagine as a sort of stand-in for a stamina bar, which the game does not have. Rather, you have to manage your resolve and how it limits your ability to do things like use those individual abilities. However, you don't have to worry about running out of stamina. You can sprint, basically forever, in combat, out of combat, etc. Which is probably for the best because, one, I wouldn't exactly say criticism, more of just an early observation thus far with the open beta and this, is that the effective range of both yourself and enemies takes a bit of getting used to because the movement in combat in particular can feel a little bit odd. There are times where it feels like your character has a ton of weight to them, and then there are other times where it doesn't really feel like you have much weight at all and you're kind of skating around places. and it's just kind of very inconsistent in that feeling, I would say, and I'm curious how that'll shape up as I spend more time with the game, if that's something that I'll get used to or even notice by the end of it, that kind of thing. But otherwise, between the shells, the various weapons you get a hold of, the melee weapons, the ranged weapons, the tar stones, the seals, which change how you block and parry and all your defensive stuff, you've got a lot of options to build towards something you like, while at the same time still retaining what I would say are the hallmarks of the genre that people would be used to and likely looking for. So that's pretty good. To sort of start wrapping this up, first impressions wise, I would say this game is running pretty well. It's fun to play. I like the art, and I'm looking forward to diving deeper into it and seeing what's what. And I'm really interested to see whether or not this game can just hold up over the course of playing it in full, as at least the opening few hours have been pretty strong. But this may or may not take me a little longer than usual. My schedule is about to shift like the day after you guys see this video, so I'm not exactly sure how long this will take, but hopefully sooner rather than later. If everything goes like incredibly well, you might see this by like Monday at the latest. But with my schedule changing, it's hard to say exactly how long this is going to wind up taking, but one way or another it will get done and there will be a review out for it at some point. But in the meantime, hopefully this video will tide you over, and if you've been playing it for yourself, I'd love to hear about it, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.